we'll go to Neighbour someday.
Down in my heart, I have a man who carried away all sins to Calvary. His name is Jesus. Sing over high, Yena Nkuna Pageme.
Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you very much for tuning in and making us your late, or is it mid-afternoon watching experience? It's a Sabbath afternoon, and many of you who are tuning in South African time, it's afternoon. If you are in our meridian line, thank you very much for tuning in. You could have been doing any other thing you used to be doing during COVID times, but you chose to tune in to this broadcast. And those of you who will probably be watching this post-broadcast, you're also welcome to join in the conversation when putting your comments and questions on the comments below. My name is Naye Lupondwana. This is Kelvin on Ethel. This is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and this is our afternoon program, an attempt to use this opportunity to study the Word of God through the lens and the perspective of the pastor who was delivering the sermon. Joining us now is pastor for today at Calvin, Pastor Treasure Nkuna. He is no stranger to this platform. During COVID times, he was riding this train with us and sometimes steering it. And so we are blessed once again to have him come here and talk to the flock. And tonight, or this afternoon, depending on when you're going to be watching this, we are giving him the opportunity to answer a few questions about what you said, Mfundis. And he's going to be doing that. He's more than willing to take your questions and perhaps even some comments if you have a comment. So if you want to ask a question, put your questions on the comments below, both on YouTube and on Facebook. We have a team that is going to be looking at whatever you'll be saying there. If it is kosher, we'll ask him right here. If it is not, we'll pretend like we did not see it and probably delete it. Either way, you are most welcome to join in this conversation. We do have people who are joining us here in person, and you're also welcome to do so. This is something that we're planning to do every Sabbath so that everyone who is in the area, in the Sandton, Johannesburg area, can come to Calvin on Ethel and come and be part of our afternoon programs as we engage and chew, digest, and redigest what has been said during divine service. Pastor Nkuna, welcome. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us.
Thank you very much, Naya.
It's deja vu for you, isn't it?
Sort of.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
I think this is the right place for learning.
Yes.
This is the right place to get answers.
Okay.
So yes, I agree with you. I think members who wish to join us, anybody who wishes to join us in the afternoon for this conversation, I think we welcome them.
Yes, indeed,
Yes.
indeed. All right, let's jump right in. A very interesting topic. Oh, neighbors, there is no neighbor?
Oh, neighbors, there is no neighbor.
Tell us what you meant by that. I heard what you said, and I loved how you delivered it. You saw the raw from the platform, from people there. Yeah. They loved how you delivered it. Sure. But now, just explain it now like you're speaking to a third grader.
Sure.
How do you speak to a neighbor?
Yeah.
Oh, neighbor.
Yeah.
There is no neighbor? Sure. Or oh, neighbors, plural? Mm-hmm. There is no neighbor? That sounds worse than, let me not even characterize it. Help us understand what exactly you meant by that.
Not a problem. I would gladly do that. Part of the tools everybody uses is paradoxes or contradictions. And sometimes some ideas are harder to express, and you may need to use a positive and negative language put together to try and express a certain idea. And so on that particular theme or subject, the neighbors are not the same as the neighbor. And I'm talking about the actual title. And what we are trying to do with that is to dispel or get rid of this notion that we have of a neighbor that needs to meet certain categories that qualify them
Sorry,
as
Vanessa,
neighbors.
can you just swap that mic for this one? Because
All
we
right.
would like you to be nicely audible. We would love everyone to pick up everything you're saying.
All right.
Thank you very much. Continue,
Not a
please.
problem. All right. So the neighbor, what we are trying to do is to get rid of or dispel the notion, especially the one that we are so used to, of a neighbor, which is a neighbor is someone who is not part of your family. A neighbor is someone who is not your friend. If you needed to choose ethically between your brother or sister, between them and your neighbor, you would ordinarily go for family. You choose family. There's a saying, blood is thicker than water. There is that saying. So ordinarily we want to get rid of that, because that is not what Jesus or the Bible is encouraging. It is an Old Testament or Jewish thinking. Let's not even say Jewish thinking, but rather say in the Old Testament, that's how it was interpreted. To say the neighbor is this person that's not like me. It's someone who is a stranger to us. There's us, and then there's the neighbors. And so these other neighbors in the title, the neighbors, the ones in plural, with that we are trying to get to the more biblical definition, or the definition that Christ is presenting as what a neighbor is. Because in our main text, the debate there is what is a neighbor. There is what the lawyer assumes a neighbor is, and then there's what Christ presents as a neighbor. And that's what the difference is in that title. So when I say, oh neighbors, there is no neighbor, I am addressing my neighbors the way Christ has defined neighbors. And when I say there is no neighbor, I'm saying this idea that we have should not be there. So there is no neighbor. That's at least at a primary level of the definition. We can always go into the linguistic part of the text, because even as we get to the passage of Scripture, there is no neighbor. The word neighbor as a subject of discussion is not in the text. The translators tried their best, and the closest or the best possible translation they could come up with was a neighbor. But the idea behind it is not neighbor as we've interpreted it.
Okay. So would it not have been perhaps more potent to simply put it out there? There is no neighbor, without having to prefix it with "oh neighbors"?
It would not assist us in doing what Christ is trying to do.
Okay.
Because Christ is trying to get rid of a certain idea, prejudices, and stereotypes of what a neighbor is, while preserving the essence of what a real neighbor needs to be. Needs to be.
Okay.
So it's a way of dismissing and calling forth something, a way of getting rid and a way of retaining something at the same time. To put it in a simpler way, it's a way of Christ expanding the horizon of what a neighbor is.
Now, unlike you and your kind theologians, we don't know that there is no neighbor in the original text. We read the English version, and from the English version, we read the isiXhosa version or any other language that we don't know that there is no neighbor. Have we been deceived?
We've not been deceived. I do think that it requires careful reading. The passage itself requires careful reading.
You can read as carefully as you like, but you will not be able to skip over the word neighbor.
Yes.
It is the central issue in the English text.
Yes.
There is no way of circumventing the concept because it's the focal point.
Yeah.
Here's my question again.
Yep.
If in the original text there is no neighbor,
Yes.
and you said during the sermon, the closest we can suggest is the concept of neighborliness, the behavior, not necessarily the existence of the other.
Yes.
I got that part.
Sure.
But in the English, which we read, in the Isiclosa, which we read, I get the feeling that we have been misled. The translators added something that the Bible says you shall not add or subtract. Right now, we go around listening to sermons about being neighborly and the neighbor, who is your neighbor, and debates and conversations about who is the neighbor. And yet, according to what you're presenting now, there is no such thing in the original text. That's why I'm asking, have we not been misled?
And I would not necessarily say that the translators intended to mislead. Intended, and I'm coming to that, intended to mislead. But I do think that they've done the best that they could, because one of the problems we have, before we get to the problem of interpreting the story, we have a challenge of the language. When the author writes the story, they wrote it, or he wrote it in the language that he chose to use. And there are tools, there are certain things he can do in his language that we can't do in the English language. There are certain ways of giving gender to words, even verbs, even noun. It's in the English language, it's probably easy to give gender to nouns. She, he, and those are genders. Maybe the neuter would be an it. Those. But in the Greek, it's possible for you to give an action a gender, something that is foreign to the English language.
Oh.
For example, it's possible for a Greek text to choose the language of to use the word love as a verb, as an action, and use a feminine gender to the verb, because it's trying to express a certain femininity of the action than a masculine approach towards whatever action that is being presented. It's something we don't have in our English language. But in the Greek text, there's all kinds of nice things you can do with the language there.
And I'm stressing this part because as we go into our conversation, this is going to be a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
I'm stressing the issue of, and you're bringing in intention. They never intended. That's how pastorly of you.
Yeah.
But here we are talking about people who understand or understood, or at least we believe they understood Koine Greek better than you. It's a third or fourth language.
Sure.
With them,
Sure.
it's supposed to be the first language or the second at worst.
Yes.
You don't take a person who does not speak fluent isiXhosa and expect him to translate from English to isiXhosa.
Sure.
You don't take a third language speaker to do that.
Yes.
So how is it that they knowing or supposed to know Koine Greek better than you, a third language
Sure.
speaker,
Sure.
and yet you are able to pick that up and deliver it to us, and they didn't? It speaks to my counter-arguing your
Okay.
well-intended suggestion that maybe they never intended.
Sure.
They should have known, and quite frankly, I can argue that they did know better, but they just chose not to.
One of the things you will pick up in the sermon is that as much as I say there is no neighbor, I use the word neighbor quite often because of the limitation of the language. The language of delivery, which was English, has limitations to it. So the question of intent, I'm trying to express that I don't think it's their own doing. I was not there. I can't speak to their intent. But I do think that there is a major language issue, not only with translation, but embedded in the very story, in the very thing, the thing that the lawyer is querying. We tend to say he wants a definition of what is a neighbor. That's what he wants. He wants to know that what is a neighbor. And the interesting part for me is how Jesus then responds. And he uses an English word, but I want you to hear how the nuances of the question. The lawyer says, "Who is my neighbor?" So after Jesus tells the story, Jesus asks his own question. Who of the three was neighbor to the man? He doesn't say who was a neighbor to the man. Who was neighbor to the man? And that is not a noun. He's not using that as a noun. He's using it as an adverb, as not even a neighborly. Neighborly would be an adjective, but that's not where we are. But he's using it as something that qualifies a particular action. He's trying to qualify an action to say who deserves this action. So that's what is happening in that linguistic challenge that we have, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, let's now bring it to us today. Remember, when we are reading these texts, we are bringing our own prejudices, our own biases to the text.
Yes.
One of the most obvious of the biases that we live in post-colonial, post-modern times, and I can dare say in any and every society in the world, the known world, is safety first.
Yes.
Today, I am not going to drive through and see a person on the side of the road and decide I'm going to stop.
Yes.
Unless I have signed a Hippocratic oath, and then I put on my siren there, put on my,
Sure.
I've signed the Hippocratic oath. If you're not a doctor or a nurse or in that field, you just call for 911 ambulances,
Yeah.
Is it really applicable today? Do you really have an expectation that people in the year 2022, Johannesburg, South Africa, are going to get out of their car, help somebody who they see on the side of the road apparently harmed, knowing full well that he may be part of a syndicate? We've seen this in the news.
Yep.
Is that text in the Bible applicable to modern day South Africa?
Okay.
Johannesburg, South Africa.
Yep.
Manhattan, New York.
Sure.
When you leave Heathrow in London, you need to make sure that everything, Heathrow, London.
Yep.
Do you really expect people in this postmodern world, in this so acclimatized to crime environment that we live in, to really get out of our cars, to go and help people who might be looking to first rape me, and then take my car, and then perhaps run me over with the car?
Sure.
Application, help me.
All right. I think I'm hypersensitive to words, so I'm gonna pick up a word from there and build an explanation from that. And you are asking whether this applies. The simple answer is yes, it applies. In other words, we can apply the injunction. We can apply it. Here's where the struggle is when it comes to ethics or laws. In any country, we all know that laws are there to govern all of us, to govern different things that we do. But we also know that law and justice are two different things, right? And I think in the text, what Jesus is getting to is the justice that we are aiming at. He's aiming at justice. So let's apply that to what you mentioned, the example you mentioned. You are in a city and in a world that's so full of crime, in a world where anything could happen at any moment. It's dark, it's at night. Should you stop and say, this person looks homeless, let me take them and put them in the car? I think that circumstances The moment let me put it this way, the moment we legislate compassion, that's where we are going to have a problem. So we cannot legislate compassion. We can't say that it is a law that you must do this, you must be compassionate. But you can only be compassionate when you've dealt with your safety. I don't think it's possible to feel afraid and compassionate all at the same time. And say, I feel compassion for this person, but I'm not safe, but you know what? I'm going to be compassionate nevertheless. I do think that justice has a context. Therefore, that type of compassion needs to be guarded. Let me put it that way. Needs to be guarded. So yes, are we expected to do that? God does not expect us to do anything. Quite frankly, you get to choose whether you do it or you don't do it. In the story, perhaps the Samaritan could have passed if he wanted to. There's nothing that obligated him to. Worse than that, the circumstance of the time, the context he lived in, the prejudices that were there between himself and the supposed identity of the man would have allowed him to say, no, but
I'm a Samaritan.
Yes, I'm a Samaritan.
But you made a point that was very clear, and I like that you made that point, that we don't know the identity of the victim on the floor.
Sure.
He was naked, he was stripped naked,
Yep.
beaten close to death.
Sure.
So there is no identity put there. I've heard preachers saying Samaritans and Jews, but this Samaritan helped a Jew.
Yep.
There is no such thing in the text.
In the text, there is no such thing.
Why then would we even bring the Samaritan's identity if it bears no influence on the person to whom he's going to be neighborly? Because we know there was a rift between Samaritans and Jews.
Yeah.
But why mention that this one is Samaritan if you're not implying that that one is a Jew?
All right.
And yet in the text, you don't identify that one as a Jew. Is it really relevant, or are you playing some dirty mind tricks there?
I think what Jesus is doing, why he mentions the Samaritan has nothing to do with his relation to the unidentified man, but it has something to do with his comparison between the Samaritan, the priest, and the Levite. That's where the struggle is. Hence, at the end, he asks the question, which of the three? He does not even include the man in the comparison. So it's between the Samaritan, the priest, and the Levite, right? So that's where the thing is. The man remains with no identity, and following the text, there's nothing to identify him with. Perhaps the only thing we can identify him with is that he's a man. That's all we have. A very interesting term. Yes, it is masculine, but a very interesting humanitarian term. A certain human being was just walking there. We know that it was a male because even linguistically it is a male. But a neighbor should not be limited to a particular gender. We should be able to take the same compassion and apply it to any gender for that matter. So yes, the comparison of the Samaritan is not in relation to the man. It is in relation to the priest and the Levite.
And again, the suggestion there, and when you listen to Christ conversing with the expert of the law or the lawyer, you get the sense that these are kin. They're both Jews. Jesus is a Jewish and the lawyer is a Jewish, and they're talking about Jewish law.
Okay.
And then he uses a Levite as an example, which is also Hebraic.
Right.
And then the priest, also Hebraic.
Yeah.
And then a Samaritan, non-Hebraic. What's going on there?
Truth of the matter is, he is touching on the issues between them, the rife between the Samaritans and let's call them the Hebrews. And I'm trying to be contextually relevant on the basis of what is happening all over the world. But there is a problem. There's a clear problem between the identity of the expert of the law and the man, we can make that relationship between the expert of the law,
Yeah.
represented by the priest and
Yes,
the Levite,
yes.
and the Samaritan, the person that they have no relations with, they have no dealings with them. Arguably coming from the same lineage,
Yes.
but simply because the other guys did not want to be part of the rebuilding of the temple,
Yes.
we are going to have a problem with you and we have no dealings with you. In
Yeah.
fact, we don't think you are descendants of any of the 12 tribes.
Yes.
We think you are one of, maybe not even Joseph's children. We don't know where you come from.
Yes, yes.
So those type of
Which, by the way,
issues,
Joseph's children were blessed by Jacob.
they
Yes.
were, and we count them as the sons of Jacob, even though we know they're not necessarily the sons of Jacob. But anyways, we accept the fact that Jesus is dealing with the prejudices that are embedded in there, that are there. They are silent in the text. If you had not heard that story before, then you are hearing it for the first time. There was a priest, there was a Levite, there was a Samaritan. This one helped, that one didn't help. It made no difference. It made no difference. However, on the basis of just reasonable humanness, let's forget the title that he was a priest or a Levite or a Samaritan.
Yeah.
Just any person.
Yeah.
We know from the three of them, the third guy was the one who was neighbor to the man who was head.
And then you spoke about the types of love. I found that rather curious that you chose not phileo. You said we must agape. How did you know that this one is agape? Does it say in the original Greek?
It does. It does in the original Greek. It is agape.
Okay.
It is agape. Once again, the limitation of language.
Yeah.
For us, well, not limitation of us, for the English speaker, you only have one single word, which is love. That's how we have it. Sometimes we try to explain love with other terms, friendship. We even use the word relationship, and the word relationship has a connotation of a romantic relationship, eros type of love. So we have all these terms, mother, brother. They are there in the Greek, but the Greek has a clear definition, has clear definitions on how we relate to different people. If I relate to my wife, it would use all other words, but it will use eros. It would not use eros when I'm relating to a sister.
It would be odd if it doesn't use eros with your wife.
It would be very odd. Just as it would be very strange for it to use it with a sister or somebody else.
Exactly.
Correct?
Or your mother.
Right. Or a mother or anything like that, which the Bible is against. All kinds of
things. Yes.
But it specifically chooses the word agape.
Okay.
In the passage we read, that's the only word that appears. There is agape.
Okay.
Now, if we needed to go back to other passages that somehow mirror this incident, where Jesus is asked which of the commandments, and then he takes two different commandments because one comes from Deuteronomy, one from Leviticus. Even on both texts, in the Old Testament Greek, it would be agape. So both of them appear, whether Old Testament or New Testament, it remains that agape kind of love.
All right, so we're going to get into the uncomfortable parts of our conversation, and here, this is the opportunity for everyone to join in the conversation. You're most welcome to raise your hand, and there you go. Those who've got hands already. So any and everyone is welcome to join in, but most importantly, you online, we would love you to put your points, questions, or comments on there, and our team will read them out so that we can be able to have the pastor answer. So, Pastor, you've seen that we've got two hands. Is that two hands already? All right. Before we go to those two hands, you then said, we must agape.
We must agape.
Is it practical, though? Because you can say to your son, my youngest is 7 now.
Sure.
You must love this car the way I love it.
Sure.
But is it really practical? Is it real? Is it ever going to happen? Is it ever going to happen that my 7-year-old is going to be able to love the car? I'm giving it to him the same way I do? Really now? No, seriously.
Look, he probably won't. He probably won't love it because it's not his choice and all kinds of things. But the text
Just
is
the capacity.
But the text is that radical that it requires us to love. And there's a common definition that says agape would mean unconditional love. Perhaps in my view, and others, I would think, perhaps the best explanation or possible alternative explanation, trying to be humble, the alternative explanation would be limitless love. Love without boundaries. Others use a negative term to say reckless love. Perhaps that's a much closer definition than saying unconditional love.
But during the sermon, Mfunsi, you said,
Yes.
love the way God would have loved.
Yes.
And that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes.
Is a human being, a finite mortal, able to do what God would have done?
God would not legislate love if he did not know that we can do it. He would not make it a command. If he makes it as a command, that means he knows we can do it. And then he further goes and gives us an expansion of what it means to love the way God loves. Yes.
Okay.
Mfundisi, I just wanted to raise on the issue of love.
Yes, sir.
You said that, again, I'm expounding. You said that God is not asking us for filial love
Yes.
to our neighbors.
Yes.
He's actually asking us for the
Agape.
love. Now, I go to the book of Ephesians,
Yes.
where it says, husbands, love your wives
Yes.
as like God loved the church.
Yes.
So you're saying, therefore, that even that is agape love. Is God talking about eros love there? Is God talking about filial love there? Or is God talking about agape love? I'm going somewhere with that point.
All right.
I'm just trying to get a sense of this love thing in terms of how far does it go, depending on the distance, in the relationship. Because now you've said, I need to love my neighbor more than I should love my sister, basically. Because filial love, yes, it is strong, but it's based on a bond. But you're saying that for my neighbor, I should go beyond and love as
Must be
God.
reckless.
I should be reckless in love. I like that word. I actually like that reckless word actually also. I do like that.
You like that.
I know you say it's negative, but I think it's not negative. I think it's a very good adjective.
Expressive, yeah.
Yeah, very expressive.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to find out, are we talking about the eros love in Ephesians?
All right.
Are we talking about filial love?
Okay.
Or are we talking about agape love between husband and wife?
All right. Check.
Okay.
No.
Let's get that answer first, and then
I wanna
we'll give
move-
you a follow-up.
All right. So that question is very textual, and I just conferred with
Yes.
the Greek text. It is agape there, where it says, "Husbands, agape your wives."
Yeah.
As I think we should be able to read it, agape your wives, just as Christ agape the church. Yes.
So to me again, then Fundesi, I do not know why we even talk about all these other loves, because the way it is, it seems to me
Sure.
the only love we should really be talking about is agape in any relationship.
Sure.
I do not see, because when you say eros, I think you're merely talking about the dimension between the parties. But from a love point of view,
Yeah.
I think I can't agape my neighbor and filial my
course,
son.
of course.
So I have to agape also my son.
Yes.
So that's why I'm then struggling. Why we have this differentiation when, it seems to me,
Sure.
That the
if a
apex-
stranger
Yeah.
should be agaped, therefore everyone else around me
Yes.
Should be agape.
definitely should be
Who has
agaped
less
also.
proximity, by the way. Noted, ma'am. Noted.
Before
Yeah.
we go to a different hand, we should be able to realize that this neighbor and your son are not different. Neither are you different. Both of them require agape love.
All of them are
equally.
candidates of grace.
All of them are candidates of grace. All of them are neighbors.
Yeah.
Your wife is your neighbor. She is your wife. but she is your neighbor, and God demands agape from all mankind.
Ooh. All right, we've noted you. We've noted you. Yes, go ahead, Wagaid.
Okay. So I think my question comes maybe more from some of the points that were coming from the sermon in relation to love. So I think you're talking about doing good when you can, you know.
Sure.
And basically saying that the Samaritan is neither good nor bad, it's just the Samaritan.
Sure.
And then you say, no, as a highlight, you say, no, do good when you can. But then how do you marry that type of idea to that of love, right? Because you say you operate on love, more especially agape.
Sure.
There's a sense of consistency, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But in that particular point where you say, do it when you can, it just is like, if you can, do it. If you can't,
It's optional.
it's optional.
Yeah.
So it's just saying, how do you reconcile those two, ideas that one is saying it has consistency, the other one says it's infrequent.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I think you'd remember that the choice of words was love when an opportunity presents itself, right? So that it's not, you do have an opportunity.
Bring the mic closer to you.
Yes, you do have an opportunity to, whenever an opportunity presents itself for you to agape, then seize the moment and agape at that moment, right? Now, your question was, how do we relate that?
He's suggesting, and
yes.
I love what he's
Sure,
bringing there.
sure.
He's suggesting that with people that we claim to love,
Yes.
that's supposed to be something that we do whether we feel like it or not.
Okay, true.
You love your wife whether you like it or not.
Sure.
You love your brother, your sister, your mother,
Yep.
whether you like it or not.
Yep.
You don't seize opportunities.
Sure.
Every opportunity is your opportunity.
Yes.
And that's what he's suggesting. But in your sermon, you said Instagram moments.
Okay.
When there is a moment,
Sure.
seize it.
Yes.
He's suggesting every moment
Yes.
is your moment.
Yes.
In good times and in bad.
Correct. If only good times and bad times were not moments. But we need to appreciate the fact that I can sit here and say, I love my wife, and I do. But she's not here for me to love her. It's a general description that I give that I love her, which is true. But if love is an action and I'm seated here, I'm not doing any loving. And that's what I mean by moments. That when it's a moment and I'm given a moment to show my love, to act out my love, I should be able to do that, regardless of how I feel about it. I should be able to do that. So the moments that I'm referring to is that we always have these opportunities to show our love, to express our love. When we are seated at church, when you are at church, you can't say you are loving your neighbor when you are in a church service. You are just in a church service. Because at that moment, you are engaged in worship. You are not engaged in an opportunity to be neighborly. Right? Okay. But when you say you walk out, and the moment you all step out of the door, an opportunity presents itself, seize the moment.
Yeah.
And be loving to that neighbor.
All right. Ma'am?
In fact, I understood that particular context of the sermon. This is not why I raised my hand, by the way.
Okay.
I understood that particular context of the sermon to say, I think you mentioned something like saying you are not good, but
yes.
you do good.
Yes.
Don't sit and say I'm good,
yes.
but do good. So those opportunities can recur all the time,
yes.
and you take them all the time.
Yep.
That's what I understood it
Sure.
to be. It's not once in a while. But I want to go back to agape love. I'm completely flabbergasted by this. Okay. Let me understand. I would not like it when my husband agape loves me. Or let me put it this way. Is agape love not an overarching love? And then there are this. Because if all along I've understood agape love to be brotherly love. It's the love that you show to others, to your non-existent neighbors.
And what would be phileo?
So phileo, on the other hand, is the love that comes as a result of that bond which we've created.
With a brother.
So, but I'm saying, are the two mutually exclusive? So when I raised my hand, I wanted, because it seems like we are putting them in silos. There's
Yes.
agape love, there's fellow, I don't know, what's the other one?
Yes.
So
Eros.
whatever.
Yes.
We seem to be talking about them as though there's this and that.
Yes.
Whereas in my mind, I'm thinking, yes, you're my husband, I need you to do good for me as fellow Christian, as a fellow human being. But
Okay.
beyond that,
There's Eros.
there is Eros, Buddhi, that you cannot give to.
Of course.
Yes,
Of course.
yes,
Of course.
yes.
Of course.
And by the way, for those who may not know, the first question was from the husband she's referring to,
Okay.
and she's the wife of the
Sure.
first question.
All right.
Just for those who may not know, go ahead, Vunis.
Correct. I like the metaphor or picture imagery that she used of silos, where we have certain loves that we put in these categories: eros, phileo, and the others. Is love and is agape not an overarching love? What God is asking from us is agape. That is what God is asking from us. Now, God also asks of us eros love, but in a particular context. Because the moment you become erotic with your wife, that's good. That's perfect. The moment you take eros love out of that context and use it in a different context with someone who you are not married to, that's something different. And God calls that either adultery, fornication, or all other terms.
It's no longer Eros now.
It's no longer.
It's no longer love.
It is eros. It is
Is
eros.
it love?
It is eros.
When you go to a prostitute there, that's still love? When you go to your sister, that's still love?
It's some form of love, at least in the Greek context. At least in the Greek context. If someone was to take eros and apply eros to their sister or their brother, God calls that incest, and which is prohibited, and God does not want that. So
He doesn't call it love.
no, it is not. It cannot. It's eros. It's eros.
You see, you're using Greek there, Funisa.
Yes.
I want us to go back to
Yes.
our application.
Yes.
Is it still love?
Okay.
David's son raped David's daughter.
Yes.
Was that love?
Right. I'm going to answer, and I'm going to take a route that is dangerous. It is love. Provided you understand the Greek differences of love. Provided you understand the Greek
Help
differences
us
of
understand.
love. Is it love when... Here's a nice one for me. The Bible says Jonathan loved David. And then and then somewhere it says love your wives. And then somewhere it says love the Lord your God. Are we saying love your wife and love David are the same? We must admit to ourselves that even in the English language, we know those are different shades of love.
But was that eros between Jonathan and David? That's what we're trying to get at, because what came out there,
Yes.
and it's very clear, and I like the fact that she does expect eros.
Yes.
She expects eros.
Yes.
Dal.
Yeah.
But what came from what she said is now
Yes.
the distinction there.
Yes.
Do you still call rape love? Because you're suggesting now it's eros. Eros is eroticism that is having love in it, or love that includes eroticism. But eroticism in and by itself
Yes.
doesn't mean it's love.
Right. I think you are using two words, right? In the English version, you are using love. You are using erotic. Erotic derives itself from the Greek. We know eros, right? Rape does not have any derivative from the Greek. It does not. It does, however, have eroticism. Now, to be erotic with a wife, your wife, and to be erotic with someone that's not your wife, what makes the difference is not the act. What makes the difference is the morality in that. That's the difference. That's where the rubber meets the road, to say this one is acceptable because it's your wife. This one is unacceptable. but the act is the same.
All right. We are taking a round of hands. Seko, please just keep an eye on YouTube and on Facebook so that we don't forget them. We have more hands here. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, I had a comment before this, so now I've got like 2 comments. I think, ne? You can eros your sister. You can love your sister. Sorry, let's put it that way. You eros your partner, right? But you can't
Wife or husband.
Your wife
spouse.
or husband.
Not
Spouse.
partner, spouse.
Yeah. But
Your wife or husband.
your wife or husband.
It has to be
right?
husband or wife.
Let's leave
But
spouse
now-
or partner out.
Okay, wife
Okay.
or husband, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do boyfriends and girlfriends do? But now, once it's outside that, I think now it's lust comes in, right? It doesn't change the fact that you love the person, but lust now takes over, which makes you rape another person, right? And so that's what I wanted to make a comment on. And then, sorry to take you back, Mfundisi, I have a question. We say that we should love our neighbors. That's what the Bible says, right? And Christ made an example of the Samaritan, your sermon, basically, right? And you say that if robbers actually had love in them, they wouldn't have done that to the next person.
Correct.
So we made an example that we can't really lift people because now we live in a crazy, sick world. And then there is a verse in 1 John 4 that says that love casts out fear.
Yes.
Right? So how do we link that? The fear of being mugged, being raped, now you can't help the next person because you have that fear. How do we link that with 1 John 4 verse 19?
Okay. A beautiful question, because the question is situated in the story. Let's take the robbers as an expression of all things that we fear about the society we live in. The mugging, the rape, the possibility of murder, being gunned down, your kids being killed in front of you. If the proverbial perpetrator had agape love, there would not be any need for crime. There wouldn't. If human beings, all human beings, were loving each other at an agape level, none of these things would take place. In Romans, I think it's 13, Paul makes the argument that, and he's arguing about governments that are in place. He says, governments have nothing against anyone that does good. And it is just after he spoke about loving your neighbor. And he's making the argument that there's no law against loving your neighbor. Then he says, but governments have a problem, authorities have a problem with anyone that does wrong. And hence government then steps in and sets certain laws. They are interested in the person that does wrong. The reason why we have prisons, it's not because the world is full of good people. If the world was full of only good people, we would not need prisons. If the world was full of, and for me the question is, if the world had only good people in it, would we need judges? You know, what are they judging? Do you judge the level of goodness? Good is good, right? But I do think that the wrong allows then for governments to come up with all these certain things. So the point I'm making to you is that if the stranger we are so afraid of, if we knew that person had love, we would fear absolutely nothing. I don't need to fear my partner or wife because I know that this person loves me. I know. So I don't need to fear them, right? So love casts out all evil. And then somewhere it says, love covers all evil. Where I will cover and protect my what, right? Now, that's where the difference. Sometimes it's easy for us to cover our family members. It's easy for me to protect my family and say, I will not throw my family under the bus. I'll correct them at home, but in public, I protect them, come rain, come sun, whatever comes, I will protect them, right? But I do think that, yes, I do acknowledge, I'm not naive to the fact that the world we live in is not all that good. But where we have an opportunity to be good, I think we should be able to do some good. I don't think that the robbers in the story don't have it in them to repent. I think they somehow, because they are human, there is no human being that cannot be redeemed. There's no human being that cannot be rehabilitated. And I know I am saying a whole lot of things in that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I am saying that.
All right, let's take another hand.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, Pastor, you used one particular word which I like the most. You said humanness. Can I say humane, right?
Yes.
And I want to put it in, let's take into consideration, these people existed, the Levite, the priest, as well as the Samaritans.
Yes.
They were in a political strife. So we could call it some xenophobia, or we could call it tribalism. Okay. So that's what I want to focus on, right? I want to talk on the political aspect of it. And so what I'm really asking for is, what is your take? What is your advice? Okay? We live in a society, global society, where there's Nazism. There is homophobia, transphobia, right?
Yes.
There is xenophobia in South Africa. But then as a church, as a community, we haven't wrapped ourselves around understanding, let me rather say, we haven't developed to a point where we use the right words to identify the political differences.
Okay.
So where I'm going with this is that some people don't describe what is happening in South Africa as xenophobia, but some do.
Sure.
And if you would look at American politics, some people don't see that, no, this is right-wing politics, this is extreme left-wing politics.
Sure.
So how do we as a church go back to the communities that we live in and respond in a humane way to someone who's of a different political identity? Okay. This could be your homosexuality. This could be you as a Palestinian or a Jew. How does the church and how do Christian individuals respond in a humane way? So I'm just asking for what's your take, what's your advice?
All right.
Thanks.
I'd like to use as an illustration one word that you used. You used the word, I'm going to take a word from you. I want to look at the word community. There is the primary definition of community, which is a common unity. Correct. And then there's I'll call it the secondary meaning, which is common munitions. Because in that word, there are munitions in the same word. And munitions would be any ammunition that you have against an enemy. The word community is a military term that says there is a border we put in defense of what we have in common. And these are munitions we have against any person that comes from the outside as a stranger or as an enemy. Right? Hence, we have the existence of your military in any country. If everybody was loving, we would not need the military. If there was nothing, we would not need that, right? But we live in a different society. So the society we live in, has put up those boundaries because of our sinful nature. And I'm trying to be spiritual about it, because of our sinful nature, because of our evil, our inclination to commit sin, we have decided to put those boundaries. Now, how does the church respond to those boundaries that we have placed? whether it's xenophobic or any other phobia that we may have. I would like to respond by saying, I'll say two things. In South Africa, the church, and hear me twice when I say the church, I'm talking about the church, our church. Yeah, I think when I say our church, it makes better sense. Our church, at some point, our church had to respond to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And if you read the statement our church has drafted, we were at least honest enough to acknowledge that we were not neighborly. And there's a phrase that is used in that statement where we say, we failed at a time where there was apartheid, we failed as a church to be neighborly. That's what we've acknowledged that to ourselves. But that acknowledgement has not translated to each and every one of us. That is why those boundaries are still going to be there. That is why we still have racial issues. That is why we still have xenophobic issues. That is why we still have all kinds of issues. Sadly, sometimes even in the church. But if we need to be the church of Christ, we need to be a church that is neighborly, a church without borders. And that has implications. I will leave this last point I'm going to make to the elder. You will deal with that one. Let me put it as a question. How would the Adventist church look like if we had people that were baptized, but we had no membership? It's not a salvific question, it's a policy issue. But how would the church look like if we had no membership? Because membership says there's us, there's you. There are those who are inside, those who are outside. But I wonder what would happen to the church if we got rid of this border called membership. And we baptize, and you don't have this except membership. So I'll leave that to you, Elder.
Yeah. No. I don't want us to digress. Yes, I don't want us to digress. We can have it as another conversation on another Sabbath, Mfunis. But there's a part that you skirted very comfortably, nicely, gently, the issue of homophobia, which he reiterated. I think I counted 3 times there where he mentioned it. Kindly address that part as well.
All right, I'll address it directly to say the way the church needs to respond to is that the church needs to be open to accept any human being. Accept them because that's what we need to do. In the parable, we don't know whether the man that was hurt was morally right or not. We don't know anything about that man. For all we know, that was a casualty. He fell amongst robbers. Where was he going? Where was he coming from? What was he carrying? We don't know anything about the man. So before we can get to the any phobias that we have, whether it's homophobia or what, let's treat the person as a person, as such, right? Before we can look at all these categories that we then build around people, because even homophobia is a border that we've built around certain people.
Yeah. All right. We just want to put a hammer there, Mfundis. Imagine that person who was lying there was actually gay and was attacked by a mob for being gay. Our responsibility as a people is to help the person. We're not helping homosexuality. We're helping the person.
Correct.
Our responsibility is to be neighbor to the person. Any other thing about his morality,
it's a different
that's
question.
another conversation we can have when we have done our job to be neighbor to the person.
Correct.
He asked a question where he said you are situating goodness to instances or moments.
Yes.
That's what he said.
Yes.
In my mind, therefore, then I had the text, James chapter 4, verse 17.
Okay.
You know? And James 4 says that if anyone knows to do good and does not do it, it is sin. And then I go to Romans chapter 6, verse 23, which says, sin is the transgression of the law. And then I go, verse says that God is love. And that we know that through his commandments is showing the character of God, which is what? Which is love. The basis of the Trinity relationship, the relationship between us and God, is based on one thing, love. Now, if I therefore juxtapose James chapter 4, Romans chapter 6, and the essence of who God is, I then see that we have, as Christians, taken a very simple concept and say obfuscate. You know, we've really obfuscated it so much because it's simple. God is love. And God says, love God and love this one. And how do you express love? By doing good. So if you don't do good, you are sinning. That's sin. Simple.
All
And
right.
that's how basic
Yes.
the gospel is.
It should be like that.
Yes.
That's how basic the gospel is. And for me, the story, the Samaritan story, precisely shows that. It actually encapsulates the whole gospel. I just wish we could see because it does not matter, therefore, what the morality of the person or whatever it is.
That's right.
If you know to do good and you don't do good, you are sinning.
Correct.
You don't have to say, but my morals don't accept it. No. It says,
Do good.
do good. Why are you doing good? Because God is good.
Yes.
Because God is love. And you're showing. Simple. That's all life is all about. But guess what? Christians.
Yeah. They want to do good to the good. Why? Yes, ma'am. Just wait for the microphone, ma'am.
And while it's roving, it's so beautiful what he said, that it's that simple. You take that as a principle, you can apply it in any context you are in. Then you understand all the 600 and something laws, because that's the basic thing. Do good to somebody because you love and because God is love. If you don't do good, you sin. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
Even so, can I ask, I'm sure everybody sitting here, this concept that we're talking about, or at least that explanation, we all know it.
Correct.
I want to assume no one is going to sit here and say, I heard that for the first time. And over time, I'm beginning to believe that the church as an organization is a hindrance to that very concept. Honestly, I believe so. Because I promise you, we sit here, okay, not after COVID. We used to sit here every afternoon, and the moral or the moral of what we are discussing is do good because that is what Christ wants out of you. Basic just as that. But I'm saying we do that Sabbath in, Sabbath out, as in remind ourselves. But nothing changes. I believe the world that we live in now is the time that, I don't know whether God created this opportunity, but this is the opportunity where Christians should be shining, should be out there. The world should be looking at Christians and saying, that didn't make sense, but now we see what they're about. But we are failing dismally. Dismally. We can sit, how many are we? We are 10. We can live today and say each one of us knows that we have to live here and do good. But I think it's the policy of this church. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's something about the church that pulls us back. Take an example of a gay person. That person, you have a better chance of you embracing a homosexual or somebody that is different from you in any form. In your own individual nature, but rather than bringing them to church. So what is it that we, on our individual basis, and I'm not taking that away, we have a responsibility and we do it. But we seem to struggle. The more we come to church and say we are Christian, the more we betray God. And I'm struggling with it.
Yeah. All right. And by the way, ma'am, it's not the church. It's Christians. Gandhi said, if it were not for Christians, the whole world would have converted. I want us to just go to that state now of perhaps being uncomfortable and just brace yourself for this.
Sure.
When we are saying take those opportunities, we don't know where the Samaritan was coming from. We don't know where he was going. I liked that. I loved it. But at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what if he was from robbing and the money he's using to help, he had robbed somebody else? What if he was going to strike another deal there to embezzle funds to come back and help this one? That Robin Hood thinking, take from the rich to give to the poor. Kindly, just...
Yes, and what she said and what you're saying, I want to link them and say we don't know where the man was coming. We don't know where he got the money that he was using. Hence the point, Jesus, there's nowhere where Jesus says this man was good. We say he's good, but there's nowhere where he says he was good. But let's agree that, let's suppose the man had robbed on a different road. He was on another street. He robbed. He meets this person, puts them in the inn. We don't know what dealings he has with the inn. Maybe they know what they are doing there. Goes away to do something so that he can pass a kickback to the innkeeper, whatever the case may be. Let's suppose. The question is still, did the Samaritan do good to the man who was half dead? Regardless of where his money came from, did he do good to that person? He did good to that person. Right. Then we can start saying, but where did you get the money from? Right? We can do, but the good he did. He did good. He did.
Now, this is the natural follow-up, which was, I was setting that one up for this question.
Sure.
So we too can take that as a template of sorts. We can do whatever we want to do, wherever we're doing it. And then we come to church on Sabbath.
Sure.
We give the good. And then when the sun sets, nobody knows where we're going.
Right.
Because this is what many of you as preachers do. You stand on the pulpit and say, where were you last night?
Sure.
Where are you going to tonight?
Sure.
And these are legitimate questions, not disputing them.
Correct.
But in your sermon, you said, we don't know where he was last night.
Yes.
We don't know where he's going.
Yes.
What we know is what he's doing now.
Yes.
Is that something that is applicable in our theology to say, it don't matter where you're from.
Okay.
It don't matter where you're going.
Okay.
What matters is what you're doing now.
All right.
Is that our theology?
All right. So let's retrace. We said we don't know, but the man knows.
Yes.
He knows where he's coming from.
Yes.
He knows where he's going. The assumption we have is that because he did good, he will inherit eternal life. But that's the exact point.
And Jesus uses
we
that
don't
man
know.
as an example, the one whose past we don't know,
Yes.
and whose immediate future we
Yes.
don't know. Christ uses it as an example.
Correct. At that moment, he did good. Yeah, he did good. But we don't know. For all we know, the man may not just be in heaven. Yeah. You know how we say when we get to heaven, we want to speak to Peter and stuff? Maybe that Samaritan man may just not be there when we get to, because we don't know anything about what he does before, what he did or what he's going to do afterwards. We don't know what his plans is with the man. By the way, we have no record in the story that the man who was half dead ever gained consciousness. For all we know, he died. We don't know. It's not in the story. We don't know whether there's a happy ending to the story or there isn't, right? But I do think that to answer it categorically, it does matter what we do. It does matter where we get the money from to do.
But where would you get that from in the story? Because in the story, as you suggested, it is not articulated.
It is not articulated in the love your neighbor, but we should be able to say it is articulated in loving God. Because God would see everything. So when you love God, love him with all your mind, all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. Love the Lord your God. So I would not do, and it would be hypocritical for me to, the Robin Hood story, it's very hypocritical. I rob to do good. What about that neighbor that you've robbed? Because he's a neighbor as well, right? Now you have become the robber in the name of saving the man who is half dead because they need it more than you need it. But we cannot do good here while we do evil on the other side. We ought to be able to say, I was good to that man. I'm going to be good to this man. I'm going to empty myself of everything that I have so that I can do good at this moment. Yeah.
All right, my worry is that okay, let's take 3. Okay, how many? 1, 2, 3. Do we have another? Yes, we had undertaken to be here for an hour, but okay, let's just take 1, 2, 3, 4. Did you raise a hand, ma'am? You're okay. Okay, you're okay also. So 1, 2, 3. You do want to say something? Okay, it's 1, 2. Is your hand up, Wagain? Okay, so it's yourself, and then it's Wagain, and then her, and then you, and then you. Is that okay? In that order. Go ahead, sir.
So, son, okay.
Go ahead.
The first question would be, while we are talking about love, it sounds like we're at risk of saying that when we love, we should also turn a blind eye. That's what I'm picking up from this, because we're saying we're loving, but we're overlooking what the person does or who the person is. And so my question is, how do we reconcile the fact that there are things that God stipulates that he does not want in his children, and at the same time also develop the capacity to love the people who do the things that God does not want to be done? And then the second one is, we can love, and people come to church and then they go and do their business after hours, right? Is it safe for us to leave them to go and do those things? Because they are, in a sense, representing us as Christians when they go out there. And now it starts to portray a certain type of image to people out there that, these Adventists, they're like this at church, but after church, they're like that. So it brings a different element of influence. That's why I'm asking, is it okay for us to just say that we should have love, but there are things we are to overlook?
Sorry, before I let you go, doctors, when they heal somebody comes in with a bed there, there's those beds with, do they first check whether this person is morally correct or not, or do you just help? Do they really care? Do the doctors have a responsibility to care about that person's behavior? Even if he may have been stabbed while in a knife fight or shot by police while in the act of robbery. When he comes into the hospital, does the doctor have a responsibility to check whether this person is morally correct?
No.
We'll have the pastor answer it. Okay. I'm just leaving that thought with you, sir. Go ahead, Melissa.
Great point. I think that's an answer. That's an answer. That's a response to him. I don't think I need to take long on it. Should we let? Okay, should we let sounds very. It's like securities, but should we accept people to do whatever they want to do, and just be fine with whoever, and without calling wrong? No, we should not. We should be able to say, but my brother, here you are wrong, there you are wrong, right? But those are not conditions for loving. That is why initially they would have interpreted the text in the Old Testament to say, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. That's what they would have. So Jesus comes in Matthew 5 and 6 and says, you have heard, they said, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I say, love your enemies. Can you love, and I'm building on what he's saying. Here you are. Doctors have this oath that they sign. You begin to, and I love doctors and I respect the job they do. Please, they must help me when I'm in trouble, right? But I do wonder whether they are doing it out of this moral injunction or they're doing it out of duty, out of a contractual thing. I have to do it. If I don't do it, you know what's going to happen, right? If I don't do it, I lose my bread, I lose my job. But what do you do when the enemy you need to love is the guy who raped your daughter? Because that is an enemy. What do you do? And the radical part is you love that person in spite of what they did. It is hard. It is hard. And it brings us to this point that the standard that Jesus is putting up there, it's very high. What you asked, whether we can love like God, it's a very, very high standard. But we can only do the best that we can do under the circumstances. Do the best that you can do, because we can't say, simply because it's too high, we are not going to do it. Christ says we must be holy as our Father in heaven is holy. But no matter how much we try,
it's not going to happen.
We are not going to see rainbows around us and angels saying holy, holy around us.
And halos on our heads.
No, we're not going to see that. But do the best that you can. Okay. And know that the best that you've done is not enough to save you.
Wagayin.
Okay, so she's burning. I'll go after.
Question that my brother asked, please. I might even. Please,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. You know, and I'll tell you why this is so close to my heart. When I think as humans, we're inclined to correct. It's easier to correct. So it's our duty as Christians to correct others so that we don't spoil the name of the church. Yes. It's for the integrity of the church, so let's make sure that you are right. And if we're calling to order, we quote a verse when we want to reprimand you as a member of the church. Sure. But we don't do the same with love. Sure. I wanted to submit that in this church, we need to start saying, even if you have caught me in a brothel, start by loving me for 3 months before you address the fact that I was a prostitute. We make it mandatory. We do that. And I also, this is why I'm saying it's close. When we started Calvin, that was supposed to happen. That was a lot of the policies that were written were to say, before you do it, I understand you have a duty to ask me where I stole the money from. But don't start with that. Start with loving me back to normality, so that I can feel like I can walk into this church. Whatever is seen as a sin of the church, just love me so that I feel comfortable. And then once I've done that, you can then go and take me to a church board. But don't take me to a church board before you love me. Yes. And we fail to do that as Christians. We rather reprimand.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd like us to add 2 seconds to that. I think what she's saying has biblical support. Perhaps even spirit of prophecy supports that. The spirit of prophecy, even the church manual supports that. And I'm getting to a point where I want to submit, and this is a strong submission I'm making. The Adventist church is a very open church. It's a very open church. Even if you go to the manuals, it's a very open church. It's a very accommodative church. The issue is the people.
The Adventists, the Christians.
Yes, it's the people, not so much the church. The institution is more open, it's more welcoming.
Yeah.
But then the individuals make it so difficult for me to take my homophobic friend to come to church with them. I would know that, okay, I can bring them, they can be baptized in the Lord. Amen.
The homophobic friend and the homosexual friend.
And
Yeah.
It becomes so difficult. But Ellen White says before you even get to the church board, no member should be disciplined up until you've applied Matthew 18.
Yeah.
Precisely in that order, where I go and address and say, my brother,
This is
this
wrong.
one is wrong.
Yeah.
So that when we have corrected it, it ends
there.
It never comes to the church board. Right? So that's applied ethics,
That's
I would
right.
think, the way that she's expressing it.
That's
Thanks.
right.
Yes.
Okay. What
So
are you-
my question kind of relates to what she was talking about, and I think you were highlighting it in the sermon, where we are not honest people, and where you say we are basically hiding from one
Everybody's
another.
hiding something.
So if I journey back with you to the olden days and the open gates, we'd be talking about small groups, midweek prayer.
Yep.
And those are spaces where people come into our personal space. You know, I know your house, I know your address, I know how you're doing, I know almost everything about you. I've got the keys to your house.
Sure.
But this day and age, you try to do anything of that nature. Where you come too close to people, people will give you all kinds of excuses. So basically, even just saying the platform to show love to one another, let's leave people outside. Let's talk about people in the same house. If I could use imagery, we are all locked in our own rooms.
Yep.
We only come out when it's supper time,
Yep.
Sabbath.
Yep.
But everything else, we are closed doors to one another.
Sure.
And I think my question to you is to say that Calvin has been a church that's been there for a while. And some of the things we used to highlight, I think if we're talking about the community guests, they would have lunch together. Those are little opportunities for us to draw closer to one another.
Sure.
So maybe help us understand what are those obstacles that are making us hide in plain sight, and how do we get to know and love one another? Because to be truly loved, you have to be truly known. But we kind of understand it to say, no, I have to be a certain version of me, and I will be accepted. So how do we bridge that divide and get into true common unity?
Yeah. I'm a pastor. So when you ask a question,
It's
all
okay.
verses
It's
flow
okay.
into my mind, right? There's a passage that says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. Right? I want to submit, even from the Greek text, that these principalities and powers is not lemimoya. At night, there are spirits moving. I want to submit that Paul is referring to the mind, even in the Greek text, that what we are fighting against is ideologies. It's prejudices. All the battle is not here, physical. The battle is up here. That's what we are fighting. And I think you asked what causes these obstacles. I think up here we have a transactional relationship with a closed unit. I know that if I expose myself to a certain person, if I become vulnerable to a certain person, the natural question is, what will they do with what they know? What will they do with what they know? So the moment I'm at church and I see you standing with my enemy, I'm already suspicious that you could be talking about me, discussing me. For all you know, you're pointing at someone behind me. But, so, and I'm trying to say to us that part of the things that we may need to do is let's not be weary of preaching this gospel. Let's not be weary of applying this gospel. But you said something profound that I think in a practical sense we need to adopt. Let's create opportunities to be or do good. Let's create those opportunities. Let's create an environment where we can be neighborly. Let's create an environment where we can break bread together. Let's create an environment where we can be neighborly, one way or the other. And I think maybe that's the more practical things that we can do.
All right. You said you're okay, right? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, my pastor.
Forgive me, we have 2 more hands, so please be as brief as you can, ma'am.
Okay.
Please be as brief as you can, Mdala. Because we have 6 minutes, literally. So take
Okay.
1 minute, he'll take 1 minute to respond to you.
Okay, this isn't really a question. I just want to, it's sort of a caution. I think we should be careful in how we define what help is. I have noticed that there are instances that we put ourselves in, and the church as a global community, they've gone to Africa in attempts to help people, and turns out that it really affected the community. Things like that. I think, and you also look at the prison. If someone has committed a crime, justice and the law says they should go to prison, but we know that prison isn't really a good place to take anyone for low-level crimes in some instances. So what's your take? I think we should be very careful in how we define what help is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the 1 minute you gave me, the system that governments have is that prisons work. And the idea behind prisons is isolation. Because you can't, we are going to take away your freedom of movement, everything that has to do with your freedom, we are going to take that away. You don't manage your time, you don't manage when you eat, what you eat, who you interact with, you don't move freely, right? And a good citizen is a citizen that knows how to use their freedom wisely, right? But whether prisons are rehabilitative or not, I think if we have an alternative, we should be able to say, here's a Christian alternative to the problem of crime in the country. What we have done as a church is that there are certain social issues that we stay away from. We don't have a position on prisons. Instead, we have a spiritual position to say, it's sin. That's it. They need Christ. They'll be saved, right? But I think we need to be able then to translate the theology to say, what does that mean on the day-to-day basis? If this world was God's kingdom, how would it work? How would it work? How would it function? How would we govern the world if this was God's kingdom?
In God's kingdom, you just stone all the wrongdoers to death.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Are you done? Yes. No, for the audience online.
I would say, audience online. I would say the leadership, we plead with the leadership of this church that once we've had a session like this, you wake up as the leadership and say, occupy yourself with what can we do as a church to be able to tick that we have shown love. What are the opportunities that you can create for us as members to show love? We're not taking away the individual responsibilities of showing, of acting out love, but also as a church, what is going to happen if one day we don't do the normal programming that we do? But we occupy ourselves with that, and we even try and measure it and see, just to get us going. Because I feel like we always do a talk shop, and tomorrow, next week is another Sabbath school and whatever, and we continue. And there is no impact of the discussions that we have or what we learn. So can we take today's thing and incorporate it into our worship experience so that we see what it means? Okay. It's half a minute. The last thing is, I am also of the belief that showing love rehabilitates a person. Personally, I think that is my experience. When someone has done wrong and you show them love, I've learned that from my children. When they expect that I'm going to reprimand them and I show them love, I think it has a unique impact on them that transforms them more than if I had spanked them.
Sure. She's got grown children. I can imagine how she's going to spank an attorney already. I don't know how that's going to happen.
I'm just fascinated by the preoccupation with finding out where has the person been or what they have been doing, all that stuff. You know, I think we are correct when we say that the church is anti-progress towards God's kingdom. When I talk about church, I talk about the system. Because, church has standards. God doesn't have standards, by the way. He doesn't have any. He says, come as you are. The church says, no. You better stop being homosexual first, then come. Stop drinking first, then come. Stop doing this, then come. God says, no, come as you are. Because God is not afraid of miniskirts. God is not afraid of anything. God can deal with anything. So we are protecting God, Tina. So, and that is why God says, John 3, I love the love principle, because for me, this really is my only belief of what the gospel is. For God so loved. Why do you think there's a word so loved? When it says God so loved, it's the love you're talking about. That reckless love, that infinite love, that stupid love, that senseless love, that in spite, despite kind of love. It does not make sense. It's the love which does not make sense. And that's what we're called to do. And then the moral responsibility for us as Christians is to do good. It's an injunction from love. Do good. Not judge. In other words, don't stand and say, Mara ubuyapi. What has he been doing? Because that calls for judgment. Your duty is to love, is to do good. And that's all God expects us to do. Because he knows, Guti, we can't judge intention. We can't judge future, past. He knows that we are incapable of doing that. So he's saying, what you're capable of doing is to help now in this moment. That's what, God is not expecting much from us. He's expecting us to do what we can do. But we want to do the other stuff which we can't do. And lastly, it says love like God. So God expects us to love like him. You mentioned an issue, for example, Ellen White says in Ministry of Healing, I was in one church, and one of the brethren was donating a carpet to the church. And we knew that the brethren was into other business, which is unsavory. And the members were refusing to take the gift. And I accepted the gift as an L, and people were having problems. And I read the book of Ellen White, and it says, the cows in the 1,000 hills, everything, the Lord's is God's. Yonke into. Nalecho ayichontshile kaThixo anyway.
Parting shot for this.
Microphone. Parting shot, the empathy deficiency that is there in the church should be replaced with compassion. And I think that if we become more compassionate, which is what the Samaritan felt, he felt compassion for this man. If we were to become more compassionate towards ourselves, towards one another, I think we will do better. I think we will not be basic. In fact, we will do far more. And it looks like the New Testament church, this is my observation, the New Testament church, when they became more compassionate, that's where they increased more in number. That's where they grew more in number. The less compassionate you become, the smaller your community is going to become. But if we become more compassionate, more open, the numbers we are looking for, we will have them. But maybe it's the measures that we put. So you must look like this, you must be this size, you must be this height. Those measures are what's keeping people out.
Pastor Treasure Nkuna, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Your insights just blow my mind away. All right, this is how we're going to conclude our conversation here at church. If I had the power, I was going to say, do Vespasm for this father. But I don't have that power. But thank you very much to all of you who came to church this afternoon. We really appreciate your contributions and your questions. Very insightful. We do this. We're going to try and do this every Sabbath so that at Calvin we have now taken a step towards the afternoon so that we can have more community in the afternoon and interacting with this kind of knowledge so that we can become better Christians. Until then, have a wonderful afternoon. and Godspeed.
Down in my heart, I have a man who carried away all sins to Calvary. His name is Jesus. Sing over, yeah.